Marsha P. Johnson. Who was she? Marsha P. No Mind Johnson, also known as birth name Malcolm Michaels Jr., was an activist for LGBT and women's rights, as well as a Stonewall Riots veteran, a proud openly transgendered woman, a drag queen performer in New York City, the vice president of STAR, which was a street outreach program that helped advocate for the rights of transgendered youth. She was also a main catalyst for the 1969 gay rights movement. Marsha was born in Elizabeth, New Jersey, August 24th, 1945. She was to be one of 7 children in her family. Marsha had a pious family. Pious, if you don't know what that means religious, just very intense. So she had a pious family and began to take an interest in feminine clothing and toys at the age of 5, but being a more traditional man himself, Marsha's father strongly disapproved of that behavior. In 1963, following Marsha's high school graduation, she left home and moved to New York City's Greenwich Village, which we can see here. This is just a little photo of it, which was a well-known gay village in New York at the time. And she left home with allegedly $15 and a bag of clothes. So she didn't have much. In the summer of June 1969, the summer of love, Marsha began to engage in politics and advocating for the rights of marginalized groups such as women, black people, and with a main focus on trans and gay rights, as well as speaking on television and at rallies to share her opinions. Marsha's role in the Stonewall riots. On June 28, 1969, a gay bar known as the Stonewall Inn was raided by the New York City Police Department. Employees of the bar were arrested for selling alcohol without a valid liquor license. Clients of the bar were harassed by police, and anyone who was wearing clothing that didn't match their assigned gender at birth was also arrested for doing that. As the raid was not the first time the police had targeted the gay community in New York City, those who were thrown out of the bar and being arrested began to retaliate against the police, and they became more violent over time, causing what is now known as the Stonewall riots. This is a direct quote from a Sylvia Rivera, who was Marsha's very close friend who was there at the time. She states, "There were people throwing Molotovs and guns being drawn, cars burning, queens getting arrested. It was like, no, we're fighting back." Sylvia Rivera, 1995. Marsha was at the Stonewall Inn that day with her close friend, Miss Sylvia Rivera, and in full drag, they protested the New York City Police Department's actions and rioted with the others. This resulted in the police calling for backup and barricading themselves inside the Stonewall Inn until backup arrived. Beginnings of activism. The Stonewall riot ignited a spark within Marsha, so in collaboration with Sylvia Rivera, they created STAR, the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, in 1970. Star operated out of the lower class east side of New York. They gave food, clothing, and in some cases, shelter to the homeless transgendered youth, as well as advocating for their rights. After traveling the world, touring in 1972, Marsha made a significant impact on the world in regard to LGBT culture and drag queens. Most notably, she worked with successful photographer at the time, Mr. Andy Warhol, who featured her in a piece he did about drag. Marsha, in her later years, became an activist for AIDS and HIV awareness and research. She sadly contracted this disease in 1990 at the age of 45, but she continued to advocate for it up until her death. So during the later years of Marsha's life, it wasn't as easy or fun as the beginning. She continued to be an avid and active supporter and activist for LGBT rights, AIDS awareness and research, and she was also the vice president of STAR, giving food to the hungry and homes to the homeless. But as well, even with all the positive campaigns Marsha was involved in and the impact she made, she struggled with her own mental health. Marsha had spent some time hospitalized for long periods due to mental health crisis. In June of 1992, Marsha announced that she had been HIV positive since 1990 and brings more attention to the issue of the ignorance and the negligence of the HIV/AIDS virus, because if we look historically, they did believe this was a virus that only affected gay men, so they didn't want to do research because they didn't believe that anyone could get AIDS. As well, Marsha also became concerned for herself in her later years, and one of her friends, because of death threats that the mob or the mafia would kill them, stating, "Girl, that's how you end up murdered." One of her friends was investigating a charity, and that charity had had some connections to the mob, and they had both received threats saying, like, stop, otherwise something's gonna happen. But those claims were never looked into by police. So, the lasting impacts of Marsha. She was an unstoppable force in the LGBT rights and liberation movement in 1969. She showed the art of drag to the world. Her hard work helped change New York City. They changed a law that stated it is illegal to solicit homosexual favors or activities from a person. As well, anyone wearing 3 or more articles of clothing not matching their sex could be arrested. So, because of Marsha's impact during the gay rights and liberation movement, those laws were changed, so they don't exist anymore. There is a Marsha P. Johnson Foundation that was created to continue and support what Marsha did, as well as gain any information on her death. Donations are accepted. The mysterious death of Marsha P. Johnson. So, the first thing that I wanted to say is it is not known exactly what happened to Marsha when she passed. But the first thing we do know is her death was ruled as a suicide, and it was left that way for years. Nobody looked into it. But during recent investigations in 2019, it was actually found that the original autopsy had circled possible homicide, but the police had never looked into it. They just kind of assumed, oh, well, she's queer, she's black, she's in the wrong side of town, so it was most likely a suicide to them. She, being Marsha, had also spoken to a friend that men were following her before her disappearance, and her friends reported it to the police. Marsha had disappeared for about 2 to 3 days prior to her body being discovered. So she had told her friends someone is stalking her. They told the police, but the police never wrote it down. They never actually listened to it or made a record of them saying this to them. Marsha was also last seen by some of her friends getting into a car with 4 mobster-like men. Now, she does use a derogatory term for Italians, and I prefer not to say it, but they looked like mobsters. Her friends then again reported it to the police, saying she was getting in this car with these men. And once again, the police never took note of that. So they kept getting a lot of concerning things about Marsha's death. But because she was black, number one, and gay, number two, they decided not to look into it. When investigators asked the NYPD officers about the old case files, they, being the NYPD, stated they could not find them. So anything on the case, the crime scene photos, the old police reports, they couldn't find any of the files. But only the Marsha P. Johnson case files had seemed to be lost. They could locate others, but not Marsha's. These are the sources I've used. The first one is just a little documentary about the death and life of Marsha P. Johnson. It's very intriguing. I'd recommend you watch it. The next is the Marsha P. Johnson Institute. You can link to donate if you'd like. I don't expect you to. We're all broke. And the rest is the links from where I retrieved other information. Thank you kindly for watching.